Hello friends! January 13th, 2012, at 7:15 in the evening, the world's largest Italian cruise ship sets out on its 7-day European tour. The name of this ship is Costa Concordia. And it's so big that not only is it larger in size than the historic Titanic, but it also has the capacity to carry 2,000 more people. That's why there are 4,252 people traveling on it. When it comes to entertainment, this ship has everything you can imagine. For huge swimming pools, 5 restaurants, 13 different bars, a casino, a basketball court, and a massive fitness center that includes a gym, a sauna, and a Turkish bath. There's even an F1 racing simulator installed inside this cruise ship. The first destination of this ship is the Italian city of Savona, which will take about a day to reach. But the ship had only been sailing for about 2.5 hours when suddenly everyone heard a loud, terrifying noise. Immediately after that, all the lights on the ship go out and the ship starts tilting to one side. The time on the clock was 9:45, a moment when some people were sleeping in their rooms while others were sitting at the dinner tables eating. Some of the people who were asleep wake up and step out of their cabins to see what's going on. Meanwhile, the plates of those sitting at the dinner table start sliding off and falling to the floor. Passengers are informed over the intercom that there has been an electrical failure on the ship. But in reality, the truth was that the ship's entire engine had failed. The ship's captain was hiding this fact from everyone. A little while later, the ship starts tilting to the other side. By now, the passengers realize that this isn't just an ordinary electrical failure. People start to wonder if something like the Titanic disaster is happening. Coincidentally, the Titanic disaster happened exactly 100 years earlier, in 1912. And when the electrical failure happened on this ship, the famous Titanic theme song, "My Heart Will Go On," was playing in its dining hall at that very moment. Gradually, the ship starts tilting even more, leaning to the right side, and water begins to fill the lower rooms. By now, people had realized that this ship was going to sink, but why weren't the passengers being properly informed? Why were the ship's captains sitting so quietly? This ship was operated by an Italian company called Costa Concordia. At first, this company only operated cargo ships, but in 1948 they started their Costa lines, and before long, they became one of the biggest cruise ship companies in Europe. Later on, in the year 2000, a company called Carnival Corporation bought it, so Costa Concordia became a subsidiary of Carnival. In June 2006, they launched their first ship of the Concordia class, which is our very own Costa Concordia that we're talking about today. It was the largest Italian cruise ship of its time. The cost to build it was $570 million, which was 25 billion rupees back then. On that day, the captain of this ship was Francesco Schettino, an Italian man. He had been working for this company since 2002. Remember their names, because they play a very important part in our story. 7:18 p.m., the ship set off for its first destination, Savona, and just 2 hours had passed when it strayed from its normal route. This was not a mistake. Captain Schettino deliberately wanted to take the ship close to an island, the Giglio Island of Italy. He wanted the people sitting there to be able to see the shining ship in the darkness of the night. Whenever a ship passes very close to land, this is called a sail past or sail by. Normally, such large ships travel several kilometers away, 7 or 8 kilometers, from the shore, staying out in the middle of the sea, because the water needs to be deep enough for such a big ship to sail. But because of this sail by, the ship was only 150 meters away from the shore. Obviously, the water here isn't that deep. There could be large rocks or reefs underneath that the ship could collide with. On top of that, it was nighttime and the ship was moving quite fast. Later, a report by Italy's Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport confirmed the same thing. At night, the ship was sailing dangerously close to the shore, at an unsafe distance. A question that arises here is, why was the captain doing this? The thing is, Captain Schettino once worked under a senior captain named Mario Palombo, and Mario also lived on Giglio Island. And the night this ship was passing by the island, our guy Schettino called Mario and said, "Since we're passing by the island, we'll sound the horn for you. We want to pay tribute to you." Hearing this, Mario says that he's not even on the island at the moment. He's actually in another city in Italy. During this conversation, the call gets disconnected. This call was made at 9:40, and just a few minutes later, the terrifying sound I mentioned at the beginning of the video was heard. What everyone feared happened. The ship collided with rocks beneath the water. This collision tore through the hull of the Concordia ship. A wound almost 70 meters long was inflicted on a sensitive part of the ship. The spot where the impact occurred was not even 100 meters from the island's shore. In the darkness of night, the ship had come so close to the island. Right after this, water started rushing into the ship at a rapid pace. Andrea Corallo, 26 years old, who was the third officer on the Concordia ship, was sleeping in his cabin when the incident happened. When he woke up and stepped out of his cabin, he saw that water had already entered the hallway. He immediately runs toward the engine room, and when he gets there, he sees that the door can't even be opened. Even through the closed door, he could see that the generators and the engine were completely engulfed by water. 9:52. The chief engineer and the other engine room officers try to start the emergency diesel generator, but unfortunately, they fail in this attempt. The chief engineer then goes to Captain Scatino and tells him again just how bad the situation has become. But the ship's captain announces to the passengers that there's nothing to worry about. It's just a power outage, which is why there's a blackout. Look, sir, we are gentlemen, and honestly, at night, there's SRNG and an exam loan. Right now, you have a usage problem. Now you have an electrical issue, right? So, you just drink. In the next few minutes, the ship didn't stay in place. Instead, it kept moving forward, farther away from the island. Around 10 o'clock, Captain Scatino feels that the ship should be turned back. If we sink, being in the middle of the sea would be much more dangerous. It's better to stay near the island. The ship makes a U-turn, and because of that, instead of straightening out, it starts tilting to the other side. Earlier, it was tilting to the left side, but now it starts leaning to the right side. The ship's crisis coordinator, Roberto Ferrarini, calls Captain Scatino twice, once at 10:05 p.m. and again at 10:07 p.m. During the second call, Captain Scatino finally admits that there are some problems with the ship. But it would have been better if these problems had been admitted earlier. Turning away from the truth can become something very dangerous, as you'll see later in the story. And this is something that applies to all of our lives as well. Now, coming back to our video, Captain Scatino does admit his mistake, but then he goes on to make another foolish decision. He tries to cover up his mistakes by saying that the accident happened because the lights went out. But actually, it was the accident that caused the lights to go out. Meanwhile, some passengers, worried, try to call the local police. And at 10:12 p.m., the Italian Coast Guard calls the ship's captain. Tell us, what's going on? Passengers from your ship are contacting us. And what else do you want me to say? That's it. On the other hand, the captain of such a ship says, nothing happened, it was just a blackout. You all don't worry. Do you? Right now, that's the mixer system. Presentation, presentation, presentation. This was said when half an hour had already passed. 10 more minutes pass after the collision, and only then do all three finally change their minds along with the captain. After all, how long can they keep hiding the truth behind lies? It's already 10 o'clock at night. At 22 minutes, Scatino tells the radio operator to call the Coast Guard and inform them that the ship has been hit on the left side and the Concordia needs the help of a tugboat. We've given life jackets to the people, and everyone is safe. Every single minute was extremely important here because the ship was gradually tilting more and more. Finally, at exactly 10:33 p.m., a general emergency alarm is raised, and passengers are told to go to the emergency assembly areas, gather there, and wait for further instructions. By 10:48 p.m., the ship had already tilted 30 degrees. It had been more than an hour since the accident, and finally, at 10:54 p.m., Captain Scatino gives the order to abandon the ship. Look, friends, more than 4,200 people are trapped on this ship, and now the ship has tilted 30 degrees. Many of the lower cabins are already submerged underwater, and on the upper decks, so much stuff has fallen and scattered around that everything is in complete chaos. In this whole situation, the captain had made just one good decision to take a U-turn. And now, just because of this one good decision, our boastful king here, the captain was trying to take credit here and wanted people to see him as a hero. It's true that because of this one decision, it was actually a good call on his part. But all the other decisions he made were foolish and wrong. On top of that, he kept lying one after another and misleading people. Later on, as the boat was sinking, our captain did something else that only made people curse him even more. As soon as he gave the order to abandon ship, chaos broke out in Concordia. Some people had already taken lifeboats and jumped into the water even before the order was given. Many others were confident in their swimming skills, so they just jumped straight into the water. They could see an island nearby, so they swam over to it. But after the captain gave the signal, things got completely out of hand, because crowds of people started running toward the lifeboats. People began pushing and shoving each other. Everyone wanted to get into the lifeboats first. One good thing that happened was that some crew members, frustrated with Captain Scatino's behavior, had already started to rebel against him. About 10 to 15 minutes before the captain gave the order, they had already started getting passengers out of their cabins and into the lifeboats. A steward came over to us because the key card wasn't working and told us, "Take your coat, your life." In the pitch darkness of the night, the ship was slowly tilting to the right side. 40-degree tilt, 50-degree tilt. Up to this point, the cabins on the right side were now exactly at the water level, so those people could easily jump into the water and head toward the island. But the real trouble was for those who were on the other side of the ship. How could they possibly find a way through such a huge ship and get out? Amidst all this chaos and pushing, there was also an Indian staff member present. Her name was Rameshana, and she was the only woman among the 11-member security staff of the Concordia. She explains how language barriers started to become a major issue. Most of the passengers on the cruise ship were actually Italian, and many of the crew members didn't know Italian. On top of that, the problem was that most of the crew members weren't trained for such emergency situations, they were just service staff. Despite all these difficulties, some crew members acted like real heroes here. Karnatha personally helped a blind woman get into a lifeboat, while 2 others carried a passenger in a wheelchair on their shoulders and got him into a lifeboat. That night, there was another Indian crew member on the ship, Russell Rebello, who was working as a waiter. Even before Captain Tino's orders came, he was already helping passengers. On the lifeboards, he kept helping those who were trapped until the very last moment, as the ship kept sinking. But unfortunately, Russell was among those who couldn't save their own lives. During this evacuation, we don't know exactly what happened to him, but while helping passengers, he drowned. That much we do know. Indian waiter Russell Rebello is said to have died after giving up his own life jacket to save a passenger and helping others into lifeboats. On the other hand, there were people like Captain Catino, who, instead of helping passengers, abandoned the ship very early and escaped toward the island. Italian cruise captain apparently ran forelift, bought his cron passengers, and still on board fighting for a while. You heard it right. The same captain who first covered up by lying took 1 hour to tell the truth to the passengers, and as soon as he gave his order, just a few minutes later, it was 11:19 at night. But they were among the first crew members who abandoned the ship and ran away, cowards. The island itself is like a small village. Not many people live there. The population of this island is just 700. But that night when the accident happened, some people stepped out of their homes to see what was going on with the island's deputy and Mario Pellegrini. As soon as they found out that a ship was sinking here, they themselves, as civilians, went to the ship to help people. Without a second thought, he jumped into the lifeboat to help the people who had fallen into the water. He said, when the ship had completely tipped over to the right side, wells started to form. Inside the ship, there were pockets of water where people were trapped. He arranged for a rope and, with the help of that rope, rescued the people trapped in the wells, saving their lives. In this early stage of evacuation, about 2,500 to 3,300 people had already safely reached the island. At 11:38, around 400 people were still trapped inside the ship. The Italian Coast Guard's helicopter and the Fire Rescue Services boat had also arrived to help the people. They managed to rescue a few hundred people from the water, but they still didn't know how many more people were still trapped inside the ship. At 12:42 at night, Coast Guard Commander Captain Gregorio De Falco calls Captain Scatino. And we actually have the real recording of this call available.
Listen. All 3 of them together make sister.
Scatino responds in a very direct and angry tone. Are you the captain? You need to go back to the ship. I order you, go back and tell me which passengers are still left.
In the middle of the chaos, he tries to make excuses.
You can't just abandon your passengers and run away like this. If the uniform is worn so carelessly, then what's the point of having it at all? He took the boat really fast. Scatino starts making excuses, saying, please, I can't go back, I can't go back. So Dando Park. This, the law says, and the order, the law does not allow for other evaluations. The law is clear after such an event. Even after all this, Captain Scatino still doesn't go back. That's why people later started calling Scatino Captain Coward. On one hand, some brave crew members of the ship and the Italian Coast Guard team kept helping people all night long. Scatino just sat far away and watched the scene. The next morning, when the sun rises and light falls on the ship, that's when people realize just how big of a disaster this actually was. Look at these photos that were taken in the morning. You can also see exactly where the collision happened and just how massive it was. By morning, most people had already been rescued. 3 deaths had been confirmed, but some people were still trapped inside the ship. Meanwhile, everyone living in Giglio had found out about the accident, and many local people went out to help. There were 700 people living on the island, but 4,000 people were on the ship. The locals opened their homes to provide shelter for them. Elisabetta Nanni, who worked at the Giglio Tourist Information Center, said that all the survivors were in shock. Some people were suffering from hypothermia because the water was extremely cold. But everyone was very desperate. They were trying to find their family members and friends. Places like the village school, churches, and canteens on the island were opened up so the survivors could have a roof over their heads. Blankets and dry clothes were also given to these people. But on the other hand, the rescue operation that was underway was going to last for the next 2 to 2.5 weeks. The Italian Navy, Coast Guard, and Fire and Rescue Service all had to get involved. Rescue divers were also needed because the people who were still trapped couldn't open the doors to their cabins. The water pressure from the other side was so strong that they remained locked inside their cabins. On January 14th, a South Korean couple was rescued who had been trapped inside their cabin in this way. Most of the people who died in this accident lost their lives for this very reason, being trapped inside their cabins and drowning. If they had been informed in time, their lives could have been saved too. In total, 32 people died in this entire incident. The next problem was to extract the oil from this sunken ship and to rescue the entire ship so that it wouldn't just remain there. When engineers analyzed this ship, it was declared a constructive total loss. This means there was no chance of saving it. This ship could not be used again. The only option left was to disassemble it and sell its scrap metal. First of all, there were about 1.9 million liters of fuel inside the ship. This was a fully loaded ship. It had just started its journey, so the fuel tanks were completely full. To remove the fuel, an oil barrier was set up around the ship, and on February 12, 2012, the oil removal process began. Since it was winter, another problem was that a lot of the fuel had turned semi-solid. So it had to be reheated before it could be pumped out. After heating the fuel, another tanker ship was used, and all the oil was transferred from here to there using pumps. This process took more than a month to complete. The process continued until March 24th. Now, the next task was to set the entire ship upright and take it back from there. This, in itself, was an engineering project. A steel structure was built underwater, where the ship could be set upright. Work on this began a year later, in April 2013. After that, large boxes were attached to the upper side of the ship. These boxes were filled with water to add weight. And using winches and cables, these boxes were pulled so they could be used as weights. These watertight boxes are called caissons. A total of 15 such caissons were installed. On September 16, 2013, the actual process of righting the Concordia began. It took 19 hours to do this. You can see how this was done. By using pulling machines, steel structures, and caissons. After this, the next step was to float the ship on water. For this, more boxes were used. Caissons were also installed on the other side, and then water was pumped out of those caissons so that they would start to float. And as those caissons started to float, the entire ship began to float along with them.
Laid out to shot, and it's a definitive, unmistakable success.
A total of 500 divers, technicians, engineers, and biologists were involved in this whole process. 19 months had passed since the accident, and just the cost of rescuing this ship was $69 million was being spent just to tow this ship to the port, and this was done in July 2014. And by now, the total cost of the operation had reached $1.2 billion. But the company still had a lot more expenses to bear. There are also costs involved in scrapping and removing the metal from this broken ship. It takes a lot of hard work from people. More than 350 people worked on this, and the process was finally completed in July 2017, but after rescuing the people, legal cases had also started here. Finally, the company compensated each surviving passenger. Not only did they refund the ticket price, but they also gave an additional compensation of 11,000 euros. That comes to about 1 million rupees per passenger. Apart from this, the families of those who lost their lives were paid an undisclosed amount. The total cost of this disaster to the company was $2 billion, but you must have one question in your mind. What happened to the ship's captain, the very person who was the sole reason behind this accident, who lied to his passengers and didn't inform them in time? And when the ship started sinking, he was the first to abandon ship and run away. Even after the accident, friends, Captain Trino still couldn't give up his habit of making things up. When the case went to court, he said in court that when the ship was 60, it was at an angle of 70 degrees. I slipped and fell into the lifeboat. And that's how I ended up in the lifeboat and left from there. Obviously, no one found this argument believable. The judge didn't believe this at all, and in 2017, Captain Scatino was charged with manslaughter and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Later on, some more interesting things came out about Scatino. Mario Palombo, whom I mentioned at the beginning of the video, was a senior captain. In 2003, Scatino used to work under him, and he said that Scatino had always been a dishonest person. He said that in many cases, instead of admitting his mistakes, Scatino preferred to lie. By chance, that night there was another ship's captain present on the Concordia, Roberto Baggio. He was the captain of the Costa Serena, but that night he happened to be on the Concordia. But unlike Scatino, he didn't abandon the ship and run away. He kept helping people until the very end, and in fact, he had already started evacuating people even before Scatino's official signal came. Later, he said, only a disgraceful man would have left all those passengers on board. This was the worst experience of my life. It was a tragedy that will always stay with me. Don't call me a hero. I just did my duty. The duty that a captain is supposed to do. Actually, this is the duty every human should have. Apart from the captain, 5 more people were arrested. Especially the high-ranking officers who were on the ship that night. But all of them were only sentenced to 2 years, because the biggest mistake here was made by Captain Scatino. Today, about 11 years after the incident, Scatino is still serving his sentence in prison. And if there's any lesson to be learned from this whole story, it's that you should never hand over the captaincy of your ship to a boastful coward who doesn't know how to admit his mistakes. Leaders who never own up to their mistakes and lie to cover them up can be extremely dangerous. If you like this video, you'll